What's going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide. Hey, I'm out here on Lake Fork today, and I got the guys from Texas Parks and Wildlife. I got Mr. Jake Norman, who you guys have seen before, and Mr. John. Today, we're going to be doing a vegetation survey, behind-the-scenes look, exclusive, never before seen on camera. We're going to go out, survey vegetation. We're going to talk to Mr. John and Jake about what we're going to do to treat problematic vegetation and why and when, all the details. You're going to get all the goods, so y'all stay tuned. So like we said, guys, we're going to be out doing a vegetation survey today. Now, John, you're the head guy for vegetation control.
Correct. The actual office is the Aquatic Habitat Enhancement Office. We're out of Brooklyn, Texas, right there on the Sam Rayburn Dam at the East Texas Fish Hatchery.
Gotcha. So you came all the way from Rayburn to come hang out with us on Fork and make sure that we're having good vegetation. And if we have any problems, that we solve it, right?
Correct.
Now, you know that makes you one of the most hated men in fishing.
That is true.
And we're going to explain all that today, folks. Don't worry. We're going to sit down with John, talk to him in depth. We're going to show you guys the process that they go through. Jake's out here because Jake is the biologist over this area. He's the biologist in charge of Lake Fork. And Jake's going to kind of help us out today. And Jake, obviously, you want to know what's going on with the vegetation problems as well, right?
Absolutely. You know, we know the hyacinth and salvinia, those problems that they can have, but we look and see the good vegetation out here. We want to keep a good balance of that. We want to have as much of that in the lake as we can. And keeping on top of those bad invasive species, keeping them in control really helps us a lot.
Absolutely. Well, good deal, guys. All right, we're going to get into it. We're going to show you all the full process, and a little bit later in the video, we're going to sit down and have a discussion with Mr. John and Jake about why we do vegetation control at times and why we don't at times as well. So this should be a really informative video. I know it's a hot topic. It's a very controversial topic, and you guys know me. I'm a grass hound. I fish grass. I promise you, we're going to get to the bottom of all of it today. All right, guys, so we're going through the process now. I got Jake up here on the front deck. Mr. John's back there running the motor, but we're just kind of going down the bank. We're going to get around this dock right here. We're going to go into this bank, and Jake, kind of talk us through what we're looking at, what we're looking for.
Yeah, the biggest thing today, obviously, giant salvinia and water hyacinth. So I love seeing all the other vegetation for now. We're going to be back later this summer to really look at the total vegetation, all the other species, get an idea of what's in the lake. So today we're looking for giant salvinia, water hyacinth. So we'll just cruise the whole bank, and in this mud boat we can get up in a lot of shallow stuff other boats can't, and see way up into the shallows other people can't, and just start seeing if we see any of the water hyacinths coming back. Okay. This part of the lake, that's really all we've had a problem with, so that's hopefully, if we see either of those two, that's all we see. I'm hoping, again, to not really see much at all today. A good day today is we don't see any.
We don't see any.
That's what we want.
That's what we're hoping for.
And time will tell with that.
So right now, we're just cruising through here, and it's good, like you said, it's good to see all this, but this isn't what we're looking for today. This is specifically about, do we need to conduct control operations this year? Exactly.
And again, it all goes back to, we want to get on top of it before it gets bad. It's a hell of a lot easier. It's better for everybody. The anglers, the fish themselves, the water. If we get on top of it and find an acre here, an acre there, treat that, control it before it turns into 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 acres. Right. Get on top of it when it's just a couple little plants. It benefits everybody that way. So we're trying to essentially catch it early.
And we're back in Glade Creek right now, guys. That's where we're in Glade Creek. And we're looking around, and Glade has been, over the last 5 years, one of the areas that has had a lot of water hyacinth.
Yep, it has.
And there has been spraying operations conducted in here, and we're going to talk a little bit later. Actually, we're going by some of the old willows right here that many of you Lake Fork hands know. Those used to be green and alive, and now they're not. And we're going to explain all that to you, how that happened, why that happened. But what we can say for sure that you'll know right now is that shouldn't happen again with the steps that y'all taken.
Correct, absolutely. The steps were taken, so it shouldn't get out of hand where there's massive spraying efforts that are even considered. And on top of that, we can get into those details later, but that was with some non-TPWD contract folks, and right now we're doing everything in-house here. It's better for everybody.
Absolutely, 100%. So we're going to keep cruising along looking for invasive species like water hyacinth and giant salvinia. And hydrilla, it's invasive, but that's not what we're worried about. Hydrilla is a good thing, right?
Hydrilla is habitat.
Folks, hydrilla is a good thing.
That's right.
This is the biologist in charge. John, the vegetation man, hydrilla is a good thing, right?
Hydrilla is habitat.
Hydrilla is habitat. There we go. All right, so no, guys, just to get that out of the way right off the bat in this video, we're not out here looking for hydrilla to spray. That is not what takes place on this survey.
And absolutely, we've talked about this before with hydrilla. We see it on a lake like this, it's not going to be problematic 99% of the time. It's just habitat. So we're not concerned about it.
Okay.
It's the other species that really can get bad, can become a problem.
Okay, and we're going to explain why those are problems and all that later. Right now, we're going to show y'all some shots. We're going to keep looking for different. Well, we're looking for hyacinth and giant salvinia. That's what we're looking for. So we're going to keep doing that. Oh God, never mind. Oh, get me out of here.
What was it?
Snake right by you, dog, looking at you. He's like looking at you.
Yeah.
Oh, get me out of here. Bro, I hate snakes so much. All right, so we're back here behind some of the islands in Glade Creek, and we have found our first problematic vegetation. Jake, what are we looking at right here?
Yeah, this is some young water hyacinth. John spotted it mixing with all this pennywort. I would never even notice it. This is the only little bit that we've seen here, but signs, unfortunately. Would you say this came back from seed recently?
This was from seed recently. What we're seeing across the state is the adult water hyacinth that was alive during the wintertime was killed by the freeze. But we have a seed bank in here, and that's what we're seeing all across the state, small water hyacinth. And you know, one individual plant doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you start looking at when this plant starts to flower here in a few months, being able to produce somewhere between 4 and 7 million seeds per each flower, it can become a problem real fast.
That being said, if that's the only piece we see today, we're probably not going to be spraying Lake Fork.
If that's the only piece we're seeing, yeah, because we're going to take that one with us.
That one's not going back in the water.
No,
we're gonna stomp this right now. Yeah,
It's a really odd situation as a fisherman, because I love fishing that stuff. It's fun to fish. There's no roots to it. They get up under it. You know, you can punch it, and it's easy to get them out of it because the plant breaks loose, and it's a fun way to fish on the edge and even underneath punching water hyacinth. I love fishing water hyacinth, but I've also seen it cover up the majority of Birch Creek.
Right.
And that's what we've got to prevent. And it's a lot easier to come in here and spray 5 acres or 10 acres or even 100 acres throughout the lake than it is to come and have 10 miles of Birch Creek or 5 miles of Birch Creek, however long it is, that you have to take care of.
Exactly.
And that's the exact reason why we stay on top of it. You know, you picture this whole little area here that can be very productive at times.
Oh yeah.
Could be solid.
This stuff, I've actually seen this stuff where it could cover up the majority of this bay.
Exactly.
If it's left completely untamed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, that's a good reason why we really do stay on top of it. It's not just.
And then if it does cover the whole bay and we don't have a hard freeze, it kills it all. It comes spawning season, all the fish, the hundreds, maybe thousands of fish, giant bass, 13+ pounders that have been caught here on spawning beds. They can't come in here and spawn then, and that's the problem.
Yeah, spawning season, really in general, they need light. They need light to spawn. Those eggs need light to incubate.
Yep.
And you have the solid, hundreds and hundreds of acres of this solid.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to spawn under there.
That's right.
Not to mention, you're not getting any additional submerged plant growth underneath it.
True.
It's shielding out the sunlight.
100%.
So it becomes almost an aquatic desert.
Right. Right.
There we go.
Grab it, Jake. Hey, we just saw you reach down and pick up. That's just another little piece of hyacinth. We got to get close up of it in the water there.
Yep. So, like you said, disheartening to see. That's the second plant we've seen in a pretty good area now. So
yeah, we were right. The other one was right there, and that one was right there. And those are the first 2 that we've seen today. So,
all in all, that's still good news. We're not seeing substantial amounts. Definitely not seeing any adult plants. And really, it was expected to see some of that coming back from seed. If we just keep seeing a plant here overall, that's still much better news than seeing acres and acres already at this time of the year.
Yeah. Yep. Well, as you guys have been seeing, I'm out here with John Finn Dyson. Now, John, tell us what you do for Texas Parks and Wildlife.
I'm in charge of the aquatic vegetation treatment program for the state. Our team consists of 6 people, and we cover the entire state of Texas.
That's a lot of work. It also, like we said in the beginning, it makes you, as far as bass fishermen are concerned, one of the more controversial guys, because you're a bass fisherman. You love bass fishing.
Yes.
But there's a lot of misconceptions about what you guys do and how you do it, and there's a lot of bass fishermen, and the whole reason we're doing this video is to get the word out about what you guys are doing when you are conducting vegetation control operations through spraying different herbicides. And so we wanted to take time to tell you guys and explain to you guys exactly what the herbicides they are that are spraying, why they're spraying them, when they're spraying them, what the reaction of these chemicals does in the water. And from a guy's perspective like you, John, who knows more about it than probably anybody else in the state, I mean, you've had more experience spraying different problematic invasive vegetation species than anybody else has, so we can probably talk to in the state, I would imagine.
Yeah, we definitely, we do have quite a bit of experience in different areas. I guess we can start with different herbicides and break it down into 2 different classes. We have systemic herbicides, and that's going to be things like Roundup, some of the others in there, the actual herbicide name, Imazamox, Imazapyr, Procelicor, a new one that's come out. And the whole thing with the systemic herbicide is that the plant pulls that herbicide into the plant and then circulates it throughout. So it goes all the way down the stems into the root system. So you get a complete kill out of the systemic herbicides. Whereas on the contact herbicide of it, think of it like paint. Whatever it touches, that's the only part of the plant that it kills. So you're going to have to get a lot of herbicide on the contact herbicide on that plant to go ahead and break down the photosynthesis process of that plant to go ahead and kill it. Now,
to kill it where it doesn't come back.
Right, where it doesn't come back, for sure. Now, one of the big things, whenever we start working, our job is to work with the fisheries biologist, because vegetation management is one part of the fisheries management plan, just as important as stocking management.
Absolutely.
or fisheries regulations, creel surveys, electrofishing surveys, the whole package. This is one part of it, but it's such a large part that the Parks and Wildlife has a separate group in charge of doing that. So when we're out here at Lake Fork, we'll come out on a day like today, early spring, and start doing these surveys like we're doing today, where we come out, we look for things like water hyacinth, giant salvinia, and we document those problematic species. Just because it's non-native doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem in that reservoir.
Hydrilla, for instance, as we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Your department, and you're the guy in charge of when we spray. Well, you make the recommendations to the biologist, and you guys as a team decide when we spray. And you're not going to be recommending somebody to spray hydrilla just because there's hydrilla out in this flat on Lake Fork out here.
Exactly. And that doesn't do anybody any good.
Right.
To go in and do that. We all agree hydrilla makes excellent fish habitat, especially bass
Arguably
habitat.
the best habitat for bass, probably, really.
One of my favorite places to fish.
Yeah.
For it. And there's no reason to get rid of it here. But we may have small lakes in Texas, like Lake Timpson. Hydrilla can cover 90% of Lake Timpson. And at that point,
you have to knock it back.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes detrimental to the fish. They get real skinny. The way I usually explain it is take all the furniture in the house, throw it in the living room, put 4 cats in that living room, turn the lights off in the middle of the night and try to catch it. Whatever cat you catch, that's food for you. The same thing, you get too much hydrilla in there, it's the same thing for bass. Rather than cats, it's bluegill, it's a variety of sunfish or other prey species, and there's just so much habitat in there they can't get to it, and they end up starving.
Makes sense. So basically, the times when you guys are actually going to conduct a spraying operation is going to be for problematic vegetation such as water hyacinth and giant salvinia, and we're going to cover why those species of vegetation are problems. But if you have a problematic vegetation, which right now, the only thing that you guys are blanketly trying to, that I know of from talking to you guys, the only 2 things that you guys are trying to make sure the lake just doesn't have is salvinia and water hyacinth. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the only other time you're going to spray outside of salvinia and water hyacinth is if you have an issue with overgrowth of vegetation. Maybe it's an issue with homeowners can't access their property. Maybe it's an issue with a small lake like you're saying, but it's either going to be an overgrowth issue or it's going to be water hyacinth or salvinia, and there's really no other spraying that you guys are recommending.
Right. There are a couple of invasive lily pads that we are here recent. Crested floating heart and yellow floating heart.
Okay.
We're doing some spraying on, but like you said, I mean, most of what we do is for access stuff, and this is going to be boat ramps, swimming areas, boat lanes. If we need to open up some boat lanes, we had to do that out at Hubbard Creek last year. Okay. And it was just a big mat of hydrilla, and what we wanted to do was just open up a 20-foot, 30-foot lane of open water so you could actually run the boat through rather than having to go all the way around a long point. As far as from a homeowner standpoint, treating vegetation in front of their house, that's not us.
Right.
But we do have a mechanism to where the homeowners can go in and have that vegetation treated. They have to go through or submit an aquatic vegetation treatment proposal into that.
Well, how do they do that? Because so let's hold on, let's back up a little bit. So something that I've seen actually happen on Lake Fork, okay, is an area of the lake that had a very good mat of alligator weed that fish were holding under. It was great fish habitat. We were going there punching that mat, catching fish every day. But it was a small little corner cove, and it had blocked off that entire cove, and there were several docks in there where those people really couldn't access their dock.
Exactly.
They really couldn't. I mean, they couldn't get in and out of their dock. Those homeowners in that cove took it upon themselves to spray, I don't know for sure what, but something. They obviously killed the mat, because I saw that. I mean, they sprayed it, it turned brown, they killed it. And then they pulled the mat onto the bank and burnt all of that grass that was in there. That's illegal. That's not okay to do. You're not allowed to do that as a homeowner. But Texas Parks and Wildlife has set up a process when you have a vegetation issue that is causing something like that for those dock owners. I understand they want to be able to access that dock they've spent all that money on. I totally understand that. I think any reasonable person, bass fishing guy, would understand that. But Texas Parks and Wildlife has set up a mechanism, a process for you guys to be able to get that treated legally, safely for the fish, safely for the habitat, and do it the right way. How do they do that?
What they're going to want to do is complete and submit an aquatic vegetation treatment proposal.
Where do they find that information?
You can find that on the Parks and Wildlife website.
Okay.
You'll go into the nuisance aquatic vegetation page, and on there it'll have that proposal form on there. It's a fillable form. You would fill that out, and then that gets submitted to the local fisheries biologist,
Yep.
which is going to be Jake Norman, as well as SRA, the controlling authority for Lake Fork. So that gives Parks and Wildlife and the controlling authority then the ability to review that, make sure that the right herbicides are being used, because a lot of times some of the herbicides that are available for use in the aquatics don't necessarily kill everything. Some of the stuff, especially things like alligator weed, there's only a handful of herbicides that actually do a good job at killing the alligator weed, and maybe only one or two that really do a good job at eliminating it in certain parts. So what they're going to want to do is fill that out, complete that. You can work with Jake on that. You can work with me. Once Jake gets it, then he'll review it. SRA will review it. Then that treatment proposal will then go back to the homeowner, and then has to go out to a notification, a list of people here across the state of Texas. I mean, it's comprised of fishermen. It's comprised of private contractors that do the spraying, and then they can go in and review it. In addition to that, my office takes that proposal, and then we take the data off of that, enter that into a database, and then that goes out for public notification on our website, which will be on that same site.
Right.
And that was all set up back in the late 1990s as a result of some spraying done in the late 1990s. What's now the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality worked with EPA and set up this system. Parks and Wildlife had to go in and provide a guidance document on spraying. That guidance document is also listed there. It'll go through the different vegetation types, the different treatment options. And herbicide is only one option out there. Removal by hand could be an option on that. Now we got to.
So they could have submitted that request in this situation. They could have submitted that request and got approval to pull that vegetation up on the bank and burn it.
Exactly.
Like they did anyway. But the problem was they went in there and they sprayed chemicals in the water. And I know from the personal experience of me being in there, they sprayed those chemicals in there, whatever they used, killed that mat. Much like the mat, pan out that way, Jake. It was much like this mat that you're seeing right here. And they put enough chemicals in there to kill all of that. Then all the fish left that entire area. You couldn't catch a fish in there for months after that, because these people, they don't know the amount they're supposed to use. They don't know the dilution, concentration amount they're supposed to use. And who knows what that's doing to those fish in those areas. And those fish, with their instincts, left that area for the most part. You couldn't catch a fish in there for months after that happened. So it's very important, if you own a dock on a lake like Fork, or any lake really, it's important that we try to take care of our resources. That's what you guys are all about. That's what we as bass fishermen should be about and are supposed to be about, And so if you care at all, you need to go through the right process and make sure you have somebody with the knowledge of these chemicals, the knowledge of the dilution rate, and the knowledge of the best way to get rid of that while preserving the right habitats for the fishery, that they have their hands on it as well. That's what you guys are here for, is to serve the public and help provide and maintain the best natural resource we can on this water.
Exactly. And we want to make sure that we make fishing the best possible way. And like you were getting at, if somebody goes in and completely eradicates vegetation off of it, that's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing.
We don't have habitat at all. And we know how important habitat is to a fishery, especially the sunfish and largemouth bass.
No doubt. Yep. All right, let me argue with you a little bit.
All right.
I'm going to argue with you a little bit. Okay, we've been out here looking for water hyacinth today, and we've covered a small portion of Lake Fork, obviously. And you guys have several boats out today that are conducting this survey. And we're going to continue covering more ground once we're done talking here. We've seen 2 pods of water hyacinth, and obviously, like in this area, there could be some back behind those bushes or whatever that we'll never see.
Right.
So there's no way to know that it's all there. How much water hyacinth do you need to see to recommend to Jake that we need to do some spraying?
For me, it has to be more than what I can pick up today. In other words, we get into an area and we get back and we start seeing, like you said, we found 2 plants today. We were able to pick those up.
And they were young, very small.
Yeah, young, small plants.
Mature water hyacinth will be like you hold it in your hand and they're out here.
Right. And I've seen the water hyacinth as high as almost 4 feet.
Right, it gets tall. Yeah.
Right, it gets tall, and nobody can get a boat through that.
Right.
So you got access issues with that. Obviously, you can't boat through it. You're probably not punching through it. In addition to that, then it's shading out all of the sunlight in the water column below. So we lose all our submerged plants, those plants that are extremely beneficial to to fisheries.
So basically, if we come out here on a day like today and we just see a few plants scattered here and there and we pick them up, we're not going to be conducting spraying operations.
Right. But what we will do is then come back and monitor again, do another survey.
Make sure there hasn't been more grow and spread.
Exactly. And the one thing we're looking for in the cold weather event we had back in February, the Arctic Blast or whatever they're calling it now.
Snowpocalypse 21.
Yeah, there you go.
I prefer to say that the world was just crying frozen tears because Biden got elected, but whatever.
Well,
off topic.
That really, any adult hyacinth we had that was floating, that cold weather event killed it.
No doubt.
But the one thing that we have left is the seeds that are still on the bottom of the lake.
It will come back.
Exactly, and we know it is. And those small plants we had today were a result of that. And we're seeing that all the way from as far north as Caddo Lake down to the bayous around Orange, where, and even farther south on down to Lake Texana and even into the valley.
Right.
And hyacinth is a big issue as well.
Hyacinth can be an issue. You know, it's something that me as a bass fisherman, I actually enjoy fishing water hyacinth. I love to punch it. I've caught a lot of fish out of it. I've got some of the older videos that I've put on the YouTube channel Lake Fork where it's me punching water hyacinth and catching them, bud, like catching some good ones. And I really enjoy fishing water hyacinth. So as much as I hate to see there be none of it at all because I like fishing it, I've also seen Birch Creek have 2/3 of it completely covered up. And Birch Creek, if you don't know Lake Fork very well, look up a map and look up Birch Creek on Lake Fork. It's a big creek arm. And I've seen 2/3 of Birch Creek get covered in water hyacinth.
And you weren't punching any of that, were you?
No, you weren't even accessing 2/3 of the creek.
Right.
You know, you couldn't access it at all. I've seen a bunch of it in Running Creek. We were punching it when there was a bunch of it in Running Creek a couple years ago because the creek channel would stay open and you could get up in there and punch it. But a lot of Running Creek you couldn't fish at that time because of the water hyacinth. So I do understand how it becomes a problem. It's a really internal battle with me. On one hand, I don't want you guys to spray it when it's young and there's not much of it because it's good to fish. On the other hand, I don't want you guys coming in and spraying hundreds of acres of water hyacinth because what I've seen in my experience, and I don't know what the science says, this is just a fisherman's eyes looking at the water. When there's, like when Running Creek had 100, 200 acres of water hyacinth and you guys came in there and sprayed it all that at the end of the summer, I saw detrimental effects to the fish in that area. Now that was a ton of chemicals going into the water. I don't know if it's because of so much decaying vegetation that oxygen came out. I don't know what caused it, but there were fish that were in an area where we were catching super healthy fish at the end of summer that should have been skinny, but they weren't because they had such great habitat and they were doing so well. I saw those fish in a matter of 3, 4 weeks, 5 weeks all of a sudden we started catching fish that were very sickly looking, very poor, very milky white film on their skin, slime on their skin, just bad stuff that you don't ever want to see as a fisherman, and you guys don't want to see that either. On the other hand, when we've like sprayed in little areas, like last year you guys sprayed, was it 10 acres, Jake? We only had to conduct spraying operations on 10 acres. There was zero negative effects to the fishery that was noticeable by anybody.
Right.
There was no bad fish out, there was none of that. So I battle back and forth, because if we only spray 10 acres, the fish don't suffer, the fishery does better. But we're not going to ever have any hyacinth to fish because we're staying on top of it.
Right.
Even though that's the better, more healthy thing for the fishery, it's something I wish we could have, but unfortunately we can't. We can't and not have a detrimental effect down the road.
Right, exactly. And the one thing I understand, you want, to punch the hyacinth. It's great. Punching grass, punching whatever. It's fun.
It's fun.
And
an old braid squeal, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Huh? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. But the one thing about the hyacinth, and like let's say when we finish the survey today, we found a stretch of this that we have 50 plants kind of scattered out in between, and we can't get this twin engine mud boat in there to get them all today. Leaving it, seems like it would be, harm. What's the harm in?
Yeah, there's just a little bit, right?
Right. But you have to look at each flower, and the flowers, it's a pretty flower, the nice purple flower.
Yep.
But each plant, that flower is capable of producing millions of seeds a year. So
it does grow. I mean, it grows really fast. It spreads.
Right. And not only does it spread through seeds, but it's going to spread by creating clones of itself. That's why you have these huge mats of it.
Yep.
And those mats.
And it can go all over the lake because it just drifts around with no roots.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And that's what makes it bad. And then it comes in, it shades out, like we talked about the other submerged species. So then you don't have any habitat under there other than maybe what hardwood structures are under it.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier, like you said, to take care of it when it's a small problem rather than let it sit there and fester and then become this huge problem.
And you can't let it become the huge problem for all the reasons you're saying. Plus, on top of that, yes, feeding bass can use the shade lines and get under there and use the hyacinth as habitat itself.
Right.
But one of the most important things that these bass do is spawn. And hyacinth does tend to get blown into backwater areas like we're sitting in right now. This is a great spawning area. It's one of the early spawning areas on Lake Fork. They've already done their thing in here this year. But an area like this, if we had water hyacinth drifting around out here in this big area back here, the right wind, it's all going to end up back here. And then when it gets back here, it kind of gets stuck back here and it all ties up together. Then it doesn't really move. And that water hyacinth can cover up this entire area, no problem.
Right.
No problem for water hyacinth to cover up everything that we're seeing right now. Then no bass can spawn underneath a mat. It has to have sunlight to incubate eggs. They can't spawn underneath the mat. So if water hyacinth covers up this entire area, we just eliminated a huge, very productive spawning ground, which is extremely detrimental to a fishery.
Sure. And let's go ahead and extrapolate that even farther out. Not only is it detrimental to the spawning, but also detrimental to the amount of lake that the fish are going to even be able to survive in. Because we're no longer getting the oxygen production in the water column. We had some issues when I worked in South Texas as a fisheries biologist down there. In near Tivoli, there were a bunch of canals that were full of water hyacinth. Well, when we did the vegetation treatment proposal process, just like the homeowners would do, Parks and Wildlife has to follow that same process to treat.
Okay.
So we were waiting for 2 weeks for the review from the list of or notification list I was telling you about, with all the anglers and the contractors and that type of stuff on it. While we were waiting for that, we had some dissolved oxygen meters put into those canals, and we just started monitoring. And this was 14 days before we could start to treat. We pulled those up 2 weeks after the treatment was conducted, went back and looked. The day those monitors went into that water column, there was no oxygen back there. So we know the sunlight penetration was not getting down anywhere into that.
Right.
And the DO, I mean, anything below about 5 parts per million, the fish will avoid it. At 0 parts per million, they're gonna, if any fish that were in there, I mean, they're gonna die. They're gonna suffocate. So, and it stayed that way at 0 parts per million until the day of treatment. Now that day of treatment, it started to move up a little bit, and that could have been from the disturbance of the boat that came in, or the prop or whatever. But from that point on, as that hyacinth was dying, that oxygen level was starting to get back up, and eventually within a few days got above 5 parts per million, and then all of a sudden we had aquatic life in there, and not just fish. We're talking crawfish, aquatic insects. I mean, the whole ecosystem was able to utilize that again.
Yeah, I got you. Let's so we know why we have to control hyacinth.
Right.
Salvinia is obviously the same thing, even worse. I mean, Salvinia is basically all the same issues, and Salvinia is not that great to fish. Like, I don't think anybody here wants Salvinia in any lake. I mean, if they do, anybody watching this, if you want Salvinia in a lake, you need to go down to Brazil where it's native, because this ain't the place for it. Salvinia is bad news. I mean, it's bad all the way around. It really doesn't provide any advantages to fishing in any way, even in small amounts, and it grows even faster and creates all the same problems at a faster rate, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of being 30 to 45 days with water hyacinth, we're talking 7 to 10 days. One football field becomes 2 in a week.
Dangerous.
Yes.
Dangerous growth rate with Salvinia. It's bad news, guys. It really is. So we definitely want to get rid of that. Now, we're sitting here talking about why we need to spray, when we need to spray. And we're going to cover the way that you guys go about it now, here in a minute. But we all, like a lot of people that are Lake Fork locals, are well aware of the Glade Creek incident. Mm-hmm. And it happened in other areas across the lake during that year too, where y'all issued some spraying operations because of water hyacinth in Glade Creek, and it got nuked. I mean, willow bushes that were live and green got killed. And we'll show you, there's a ton of button bushes and willow bushes in Glade Creek that are now dead forevermore because of what happened in this spraying operation. There also used to be a lot of lily pads in that same area that water hyacinth was hanging around in, and all those died as well. Now, at that time, you guys at Texas Parks and Wildlife were not conducting the spraying in-house. Y'all would get the spraying approved, go through that process,
right,
and then it would be contracted out to a spraying contractor.
Correct.
To an independent contractor. What were the mistakes? What happened that time?
There was a lot of mistakes, and before I'll ever point the finger at anybody, I'm gonna look at what I could have done better.
Right.
And
that's good on you. The rest of the world needs more of that.
I probably should have been more direct about, hey, make sure we're spraying mats of hyacinth. We don't necessarily need to go in and get every hyacinth out. We know we're not going to ever eradicate it from this lake. Hyacinth's going to always be here.
It's going to be a management thing.
Right, but it goes from, we don't need to eradicate it, because if we go through an entire eradication, we have to take out something like this entire area we're sitting in. And then, that's no different than the end result is no vegetation, which is no different than just having the mat of hyacinth here to begin with, other than you have a little bit of oxygen in the water. I mean, all the habitat's gone. Right. Especially the smart stuff, and we don't want that. So from a management standpoint, I should have communicated probably a little bit better and said, hey, look, make sure that we're only spraying the hyacinth and nothing else. If it's one plant, spray the one plant. Let's not, sacrifice everything for one little piece in there. Now, when it came to the spraying of the willow trees, that gave me as much heartburn as probably what it did you. Right. And I have no explanation as to why that happened. We hire a contractor, they know what they're doing, and then all of a sudden you get something like this, and it just leaves you scratching your head. And
you guys have taken some steps since then.
Yes.
So how are we doing it now? When spraying happens now, let's say that we pull around the corner and we find a big old mat of water hyacinth and we got to do a spraying operation. How are we doing that?
From here on, Parks and Wildlife has picked up the spray efforts here on Lake Fork.
So you guys are doing it in-house with people you work with on a daily basis, people you communicate with on a daily basis that have more knowledge of what to and not to spray.
Right, and we're able to, we have a little more time to be able to go in and be a little more selective. Like we talked about earlier, we got 3 boats on the lake today. This mud boat, and I've got 2 air boats, and we're going to cover the whole lake today. When we come up to do a treatment, we'll break up into 3 different boats, and we'll do that whole treatment. So it's not just one boat having to go out and get overwhelmed by a situation, to where we can go in, take our time, and treat individual areas, sometimes even individual plants with it. In addition to that, we've learned, there's a whole suite of herbicides out there that you can use. We talked about systemic and contact herbicides early on. Well, kind of going back to, I got to work with Jake. I've got to help Jake meet his fisheries objectives through vegetation control. Right. And so what we want to do is minimize collateral damage any and everywhere we can, especially on, you know, vegetation that we deem, or Jake deems, as beneficial to the fisheries in the reservoir.
Right.
So that's going to have us come in. We may come in and, you know, for instance, out here we're sitting on a whole bunch of alligator weed, but also too in there is water penny, a native species. So I know glyphosate or Roundup Custom, it's not gonna, it may burn back the alligator weed, but it'll come back. It'll burn it back to the water surface, and then the alligator weed will recover. It doesn't get anything below the surface. But what it's going to do is kill the native plant, the water penny. And you know, we don't want to do that. That's a native species. We don't need to sacrifice that using glyphosate.
And there is times when you guys make the decision, okay, maybe we have a problematic vegetation, but there's a very minimal amount of it, and it's not worth the collateral damage to the good vegetation.
Right.
There's a lot of times when you guys make that decision. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the case on Tweeda Bend right now. We're not spraying any little piece, and I say we, it's Parks and Wildlife's contractors, aren't spraying every little piece of salvinia. If salvinia is locked up in the torpedo grass mat, well, it's not doing any damage there. The salvinia doesn't create seed like the water hyacinth does, so you know, all it does is clone itself. It does it rapidly, like we talked about, but when it's locked up with another plant, it doesn't clone very fast. It's just part of that community. So there's no reason to go in and wipe out that community for, you know, one bad apple.
Right.
So we're leaving that stuff, and the focus up there is to treat those mats.
Snake trying to get me. I know y'all saw it.
It sounds like a big one.
Yeah.
But we can go in and be selective with herbicides. We can come in with a contact herbicide like we've been using in the past. We use diquat. There have been recently some issues brought up that diquat may be the cause of some deaths of the bald eagle. And it may be tied to it. In the actual science article that was released, it did discuss that further studies needed to be done.
Yeah, we don't know yet.
Right, exactly. Before they could tie diquat into the eagle deaths.
Yeah.
But there's other herbicides we can use to come in and do this stuff. Now, in addition to herbicides, there's also other things we could do. You know, we could go in and pull plants out by hand, but trying to cover the entire shoreline of this lake and pull out, you know, every single water hyacinth.
Well, we've done that today.
Yeah.
You know, we've done that to some degree today. We've only seen 2 little pods of water hyacinth, but we pulled them out. They're right over there. They're dead now. They gone.
Exactly.
Right. So we've done that today. So, you know, where that's applicable, obviously you guys will do that.
Right.
But, you know, to speak from a layman's terms, because you're talking about diquat and Roundup Custom, which I didn't even know existed. And there's like you're saying words that I don't know how to spell, dude. Like I'm a fishing guide, you know what I mean? But to kind of put it in layman's terms, basically you guys take all the information that you have and the knowledge that you have on the different herbicides, the different chemicals,
right,
and how they react to plants, and you make a decision about what's best for the fishery and what's best for the habitat of the fishery.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, all that goes into it. You guys aren't just going, well, they got hyacinth, let's go nuke it.
Exactly.
Like that's not what's happening.
Exactly. Because the end result is to still maximize as much of the habitat we have,
right,
while taking care of the issue, the water hyacinth or salvinia.
And the whole goal, from what I can gather and what I'm getting from you guys, the whole goal is to keep the problematic vegetation at such a minimal amount that when you do have to go in there and manage it, it doesn't have detrimental effects to the rest of the habitat.
Exactly.
Hey guys, I want to thank you once again for watching the video today. Hey, do me a favor, man. Drop a like if you guys enjoyed this type of content. Let me know what you think. Comment down below. If you haven't been here before, if you did enjoy what we did, subscribe. We do a ton of content on this channel every single week, all around bass fishing, all around East Texas, and sometimes even other places too. So appreciate you guys watching as always. Go check out our sponsors. They're linked in the description. Check out sixcensefishing.com. If you buy anything from there, be sure you use the code Your Lake Fork Guide. Get a 10% discount on all orders. And we will see you next time right here on Your Lake Fork Guide.